Hello and welcome to this week, which is week 6, I believe, for my Madison High School students. I hope that you all are having a wonderful week and that everything is going fairly smoothly for you. I know that this semester has been a little bit more challenging in regards to what the expectations are, because this is a 16-week course as opposed to an 8-week course. Plus, we had the hurricane that interrupted us last semester. So I know that many of you are struggling with getting in line with what the expectations are of a college class, and many of you are shining, and then some of you have had to make some corrections. So I celebrate you and everything that you have done. And as we move forward, a couple of things that I want to note is that this week and a couple of other weeks in the semester, you'll see that are going to be fairly light. So we do have this week discussing Southern Gothic and then the Beat generation and what that looks like. But the only assessment that you really have to worry about this week is your first draft. Well, actually, I'm sorry, your muckraking editorial final draft, and then also your Southern Gothic and Beat generation work. So as you are going through this, and this should probably be the first draft. I don't think that you have the first draft yet. But as you're going into Southern Gothic and the Beat generation, a lot of the things that I'm going to cover in the lecture today are going to go through that. And so since you don't have me in class working with you like a teacher, I do this with my students that I have with me. But since I don't have you with me, a lot of these questions I think are really good for you to ask each other and to get new ideas. And I know that I've sent you guys some AI focused points of what I want you to consider. The things about AI that I want to make sure you understand are that AI is not a replacement for your brain. And so as you're talking to each other, as you're getting ideas, it's great for you to reference the internet, but what do you think about what's going on in regards to all of these different movements? And if you're not a literature person, that's okay too. You can go on and be a dermatologist or a vet tech or whatever kind of career that you want to be, and understand what it is to be human. And that's what I want you to take away from this. So on that note, let's start talking about Southern Gothic literature. Okay, so I'm going to start from the beginning. All right. So as we're getting ready, I'm going to share this tab. Okay. So for this week, we're going to be getting into some subgenres of the American literature movement. So the first one that we're going to talk about is Southern Gothic. Southern Gothic is a subgenre, and this subgenre is characterized by eerie atmosphere, decaying settings, and eccentric characters in the southern United States. So as you'll see in the readings this week, this genre is fairly unique to America with subsettings of what we've seen before in Gothic literature. We see that there is an eerie, decaying, and grotesque atmosphere. The setting is southern United States, usually decrepit homes and plantations, characters that are eccentric, social outcasts, themes of decay and violence, social issues, and then symbolism. There's decay, darkness, decay of the South. And you'll see this in the works that we see this week. Prominent authors: William Faulkner, Rose for Emily. You'll read that this week. Flannery O'Connor, notable for A Good Man is Hard to Find, as well as many other texts, Wise Blood, as well as oh my gosh, Wise Blood, and then I just lost it, but several of her short stories. Tennessee Williams, Carson McCullers, which many of you probably have read in regards to, she wrote The Heart is Lonely Hunter, which many ninth graders read. I don't know if you read it though. So some things to note about Southern Gothic literature is that there's the grotesque and the disturbing Southern decadence and decay, racial tensions, and the decay of social hierarchies and religious and supernatural elements. You'll see this in a lot of the works that you read this week, and it's one of my favorite genres for a reason. But the setting here is often a character, and it influences the story's tone, themes, and character interactions. So in Rose for Emily, this is the first one you want to note, is that there's a setting as a character, the decaying southern town of Jefferson, which is a character in and of itself with the gossip and the different ways in which language travels. You have the influence on characters, the town's attitudes, perceptions, and bridges, societal norms that contribute to Emily's isolation. And so that's what I want you to pay attention to. And then you also have grotesque characters, decay and deterioration, and the atmosphere of mystery in these different works. A Good Man is Hard to Find, which is the other of these Southern Gothic pieces. And Flannery O'Connor was an American novelist and short storyist. And she wrote in the Southern Gothic style about grotesque and alienated characters. She had a lot of pieces that focus on dark humor, irrational, horrific thoughts and desires, and an overall sense of alienation. And things to note about grotesque in her work, as well as in things beyond just Southern Gothic, is the focus on the human body and all the ways it can be disturbing and exaggerated. And what she said about the grotesque is that in these grotesque works by Southern writers, we find that the writer has made alive some experience which we are not accustomed to observe every day, is that we find connections that we would see in customary kind of realism that's been ignored, and strange skips and gaps, which anyone trying to describe manners or customs would certainly not have left. But the character here is inner coherence, and if not always a coherence to their social frames, their fictional qualities lean away from the typical social patterns, the mystery of the unexpected. So in O'Connor's work, we have the sense of humanity, of the action of grace and territory largely held by the devil, violence and redemption, the shock of violent encounters that focuses on spiritual agency, racism, which we'll discuss because of its prevalence and yet also its condemnation, and then alienation. Those who feel cut off, hungry, angry, and freakish are often seen more clearly than those who belong. So grotesque elements. We see characters like in A Good Man is Hard to Find, the misfit and the grandmother. There's violence, there's death, there's horror, and then humanity. And so is her story grotesque because it is real? And that is the greatest question, is that by exaggerating these characters, does it become more visceral and real because of that? Another question that we have to ask is O'Connor racist? She uses a lot of really racist language, terms like pickaninny, which is referred to a poor Black child, and she uses the N-word and romanticizes the grandmother's childhood in the Southern plantation. So is she a product of her time, or do the racist implications serve a purpose in the story? And that's something that you have to ask yourself in your reading of it and its importance. But in the Southern Gothic tales, the settings go beyond mere backdrops. They participate in shaping the narrative. And so that's the part about Southern Gothic that's so important. Now, as we transition here, we have another distinctly American movement. And so though it's very different, the Beat Generation, it comes out of a lot of the similar themes of alienation, fragmentation, disjointedness from the American dream. And those things are going to transcend beyond just Southern Gothic literature into just literature and the literal heartbeat of what is America. So in the beat poetry that we're going to read this week, we're going to see like Jack Kerouac, Allen Ginsberg, and then some options for Amiri Baraka. So if you are interested in these texts, I thoroughly encourage that you read some more of these works. But the beat generation were the original hipsters. So if you haven't experienced much about the beatniks, the name came from the Beatitudes from the Bible, which were the famous lines Jesus, which stated, "The poor, the meek, and those who mourn were blessed." And so we see the beatniks kind of come into a lot of mainstream culture starting in the early 1900s and on. So you see counterculture kind of evolve as culture evolves, right? So you see the 1920s come, and then you see the 1920s flappers where women are smoking, drinking, and they're promiscuous. Now, this was not necessarily the standard of the 1920s, but it was something that came about in the 1920s. And so then you had in the 1950s, you had the beatniks of drugs, anti-materialism, mysticism, promiscuity. And then in the 1960s, you had the hippies, drugs, music, anti-war, organic promiscuity, a lot of promiscuity. And then you have in the 2000s, 2010s, the hipsters, right? Counterculture, not wanting to be defined, independent minded, anything that's like alt or sub alt that's focusing on some other alternative interpretation of society. And so during the beatnik generation, you had Jack Kerouac and Allen Ginsberg, which two of our most famous ones. And so here's one quote by Allen Ginsberg, or I'm sorry, Jack Kerouac. "The Beat Generation, that was a vision that we had, I and Allen Ginsberg, in an even wilder way in the late 40s, of a generation of crazy illuminated hipsters suddenly rising and roaming in America, serious, bumming and hiking everywhere, ragged, beatific, beautiful and ugly and graceful new way. Beat meaning down and out, full of intense conviction. We'd even heard an old 1910 daddy hipsters of the streets speak the word that way with a melancholy sneer. It never meant juvenile delinquents, meant characters of a special spirituality who didn't gang up but were in solitary, staring out the dead wall window of our civilization." And then this is from Allen Ginsberg's poem Howl, which is one of the readings from this week. "I saw the best minds of my generation destroyed by madness, starving, hysterical, naked, dragging themselves through the Negro streets at dawn, looking for an angry fix, angel-headed hipsters, burning for the ancient heavenly connection to the starry dynamo of the machinery of night, who poverty and tatters and hollow-eyed and high sat up smoking in the supernatural darkness of cold water flats floating across the tops of cities, contemplating jazz, who bared their brains to heaven under the EL, whom a Muhammad angel staggering on the tenement roofs illuminated, who passed through universities in radiant, cool eyes hallucinating Arkansas and Blake light, tragedy among the scholars of war, who were expelled from the academies for crazy and publishing obscene odes on the windows of the skull." I have a couple pieces here. This one that's Johnny Depp reading an excerpt here.
America, I've given you all, and now I'm nothing.
I don't want to spend all of my time on just those different pieces, but I do have several readings here. of what it's like in the Beat Generation, and then some examples of even some fun parodies of beats of Mike Myers and Tom Hanks specifically, to help give you some context of what it's like during this time period.
Today,
Ladies and gentlemen.
So these are our questions for this week. So as you're posting about them, just a couple of reminders about AI use. When you are getting some ideas from AI, that's okay, but I do want to see your ideas, and I want you to embed text examples into your responses, especially when we're not having response weeks. I want to see more of your ideas here. And so, though I know that some of these are going to be new to you in regards to the early 20th century, I do want to see some really interesting ideas and some quotes come out from you. And then I also can't wait to see your first draft. So, as you are having a good week, I hope that you let me know if there is anything that you need. And on that note, I hope you have a great rest of your week. Have a good one. Bye.